Normandy, June 1944. While Allied commanders debated doctrine in war rooms, Corporal Thomas Hartley crouched behind a bombed-out farmhouse, watching another medic fall to an unseen German sniper. 14 men in 3 days. The pattern was unmistakable, the solution impossible, until Hartley noticed something no officer had considered: a weathered plank from a collapsed shed, riddled with knotholes. What happened next would be dismissed as field madness by his superiors, until 48 hours later, when 14 enemy snipers lay dead, and not a single British soldier had fallen. The Normandy countryside should have been beautiful in late June, but Corporal Thomas Hartley couldn't appreciate it through the scope of perpetual fear. The hedgerows, those ancient earthen walls topped with dense vegetation, had transformed the French landscape into a sniper's paradise. German sharpshooters nestled in positions that offered perfect concealment and overlapping fields of fire, turning every British advance into a gauntlet of sudden death. Hartley had been in Normandy for 11 days, attached to the 50th Northumbrian Division, pushing inland from Gold Beach. A former gamekeeper from Yorkshire, he understood fieldcraft better than most, but even his trained eye couldn't spot the enemy marksmen who were systematically decimating his unit. The pattern was brutally consistent. Any soldier who exposed himself for more than 3 seconds became a casualty. Medics rushing to aid the wounded were priority targets. Officers directing troops were eliminated before their orders finished leaving their lips. The psychological toll was devastating. On the morning of June 18, 1944, at precisely 06:47 hours, Hartley crouched in the ruins of a stone farmhouse that had been reduced to rubble by naval bombardment. The smell of cordite mixed with summer grass, an incongruous combination that characterized this strange war. Rain had fallen through the night, leaving puddles that reflected a grey sky. The temperature hovered around 12 degrees Celsius, typical for a Norman summer morning, but Hartley felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather. He watched through a gap in the collapsed wall as Private Eddie Morrison, a 19-year-old from Manchester, attempted to cross an exposed courtyard to reach the battalion's forward position. Morrison made it exactly 12 meters before the crack of a rifle echoed across the hedgerows. The young private dropped instantly, killed by a bullet that had come from somewhere in the dense vegetation 200 meters north. No muzzle flash, no telltale movement. Just death, delivered from an invisible source. "That's the 14th, said Sergeant William Davies, materializing beside Hartley with the silent movement of a man who had learned that noise meant death. Davies was a Welsh coal miner before the war, a man whose hands had broken rock for 20 years and who possessed a grim pragmatism born of working in environments where carelessness killed. 14 men in 3 bloody days, and we haven't spotted a single Jerry sniper. Not one. The statistics were worse than Davies knew. Intelligence reports indicated that German sniper doctrine emphasized patience and concealment. Their marksmen were equipped with Karabiner 98K rifles fitted with ZF-39 scopes, weapons accurate to 600 meters in trained hands. More critically, they operated in pairs, one shooter, one spotter, rotating positions after each kill. The British counter-sniper teams, trained in conventional methods, were being systematically outmatched. Hartley had volunteered for counter-sniper duties based on his civilian experience, but the techniques that worked stalking deer in Yorkshire were useless against an enemy who never showed themselves. He had tried traditional methods, constructing concealed observation posts, using field glasses to scan for movement, waiting for the enemy to make mistakes. The Germans made no mistakes. They were professionals who understood that their greatest weapon was invisibility. At 11:15 hours that morning, Captain Geoffrey Whitmore assembled the surviving officers and NCOs in the farmhouse cellar, a damp space that smelled of mold and fear. Whitmore was a career officer from Surrey, educated at Sandhurst, a man who believed warfare was a science with established rules. He stood before a map of the operational area, marked with red pins indicating where each sniper casualty had occurred. "Gentlemen, this situation is untenable," Whitmore stated, his clipped accent revealing strain. "We're losing men faster than we're gaining ground. Artillery bombardment has proven ineffective. The hedgerows provide too much protection. Conventional counter-sniper tactics have yielded zero results. Unless we solve this problem, our advance will stall completely." Hartley, standing at the back of the cramped cellar, studied the pattern of red pins. There was logic to it, he realized. The enemy positions formed overlapping triangles, each sniper covering approaches that other snipers couldn't observe. It was brilliant defensive doctrine, and it was killing his comrades. "Sir," Hartley said, his Yorkshire accent rough against Whitmore's refined pronunciation, "I might have an idea." The captain turned, his expression skeptical. Hartley was a corporal, a non-commissioned rank, a man who fixed gamekeepers' cottages and tracked foxes before the war had turned everyone into soldiers. Whitmore's gaze communicated doubt that such a man could solve a problem that had defeated trained military tacticians. "Speak, Corporal." Hartley stepped forward, conscious of the eyes on him. "The Germans are using concealment doctrine, sir. They're not moving because they don't need to. They've built permanent positions in the hedgerows, probably reinforced with logs and earth. They're invisible because they're looking through tiny apertures, gun ports no larger than a fist. We can't spot them because we're looking for men, but they're not showing us men. They're showing us nothing." "That's a rather obvious observation, Corporal," Whitmore replied, his tone dismissive. "The question is how to locate them." "Not locate them, sir. Make them reveal themselves." "How?" Hartley hesitated. What he was about to propose sounded mad, the desperate improvisation of a man who was out of legitimate options. But 14 men were dead, and conventional methods had failed completely. "Deception, sir. Give them a target they can't resist, but one that won't cost us casualties." Whitmore's expression didn't change. "Elaborate." "There's a collapsed shed about 30 meters from here, sir. Weathered planks, full of knotholes and gaps. If we take one of those planks, mount it on a frame, and move it slowly across exposed areas, like a soldier advancing in a crouch, the snipers might take the bait. They'll fire at what appears to be a man's silhouette. When they fire, we'll see the muzzle flash, and then we'll have a target." The silence in the cellar was absolute. Sergeant Davies stared at Hartley as if the corporal had suggested they defeat the Germans by throwing tea at them. Another lieutenant, a young man from London whose name Hartley didn't know, actually laughed a short bark of disbelief. "A plank of wood," Whitmore said slowly, as if testing whether the words made sense when spoken aloud. "You want to defeat German snipers with a plank of wood?" "Not defeat them, sir, locate them. Once we know where they are, we can eliminate them with concentrated fire or call in artillery with precise coordinates." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "Corporal Hartley, I appreciate creativity in my men, but we are fighting a war with military doctrine developed over centuries. The Germans are employing proven sniper methodology. Your proposal is unorthodox to the point of absurdity. We will continue with conventional counter-sniper procedures." "Dismissed." Hartley saluted and retreated, but the dismissal stung in a way that had nothing to do with military hierarchy. He had seen the pattern, understood the problem, and offered a solution. That it had been rejected because it didn't fit established procedure felt like watching men drown while standing on shore because no one had authorized the use of rope. That afternoon, the 15th casualty occurred. Lance Corporal James Finch, a carpenter from Birmingham, killed while attempting to repair a radio antenna. The bullet entered his chest from the northeast, fired from a position that conventional observation had failed to locate. Finch died trying to restore communications that might save other men's lives. Hartley sat in the ruins that evening, watching the sun set through gaps in the shattered farmhouse, and made a decision that would either save lives or end his military career. He would build the device regardless of orders, test it regardless of authorization, and prove that sometimes the best solutions emerged not from military academies, but from men who understood that survival mattered more than protocol. The night of June 18th brought no respite from fear, only the different terror of darkness, punctuated by distant artillery and the occasional crack of a rifle as German snipers fired at shadows. Hartley worked by feel in the rubble of the collapsed shed, his hands finding the weathered planks by touch, his gamekeeper's fingers identifying wood that had endured years of Norman weather and would survive a few bullet impacts without disintegrating. The shed had been part of a small farm, built perhaps 50 years earlier, its timber cut from local forests and assembled by hands that never imagined their work would serve as anti-sniper equipment. The planks were oak, dense and heavy, approximately 120 centimeters long and 30 centimeters wide. Decades of sun and rain had weathered them to silver grey, and knotholes dotted their surface, imperfections that would create the silhouette of a human figure when viewed from distance. Sergeant Davies found him at 02:30 hours, materializing from the darkness with his characteristic silence. The Welshman carried a canteen of weak tea, rationed but still capable of providing warmth in the cold night. "Captain's going to have your stripes if he catches you disobeying orders," Davies said, his tone neutral, offering neither approval nor condemnation. "Captain's going to have my corpse if those snipers keep operating freely," Hartley replied, selecting a plank that had the right weight and weathering. "I'd rather face a court-martial than watch another lad die because we're too bloody proper to try something unconventional." Davies was silent for a moment, then set down his rifle and began helping Hartley sort through the debris. The sergeant's participation was answer enough. Regulations mattered, but dead comrades mattered more. They worked through the night, constructing a frame from scavenged metal rods, remnants of the farmhouse's destroyed roof, that could support the plank and allow it to be moved with ropes from a concealed position. The design was crude, but functional. The plank would be positioned vertically, mounted on a pivot that allowed it to tilt forward at an angle, suggesting a soldier advancing in a crouch. Ropes attached to the frame would enable operators to move it across exposed ground from safety, presenting a target that appeared human from 200 meters, but revealed itself as wood upon close inspection. At 0547 hours on June 19th, with dawn breaking grey and cold across Normandy, Hartley positioned his device at the edge of the farmhouse courtyard, where Private Morrison had died the previous morning. The plank stood vertical, its weathered surface catching early light, knotholes and grain patterns creating shadows that might resemble a helmet, a shoulder, the outline of a man. "This is either brilliant or mad," Davies muttered, crouching beside Hartley behind the farmhouse wall, gripping the ropes that would animate their wooden decoy. "Probably both," Hartley replied, his heart hammering in a way it hadn't since Gold Beach. This was the moment where theory met reality, where his dismissed idea would either validate itself or prove Captain Whitmore correct. They worked the ropes slowly, making the plank tilt forward and slide across the courtyard in a movement that approximated a soldier's careful advance. The wood scraped against stone, a sound that made Hartley wince, but the movement was convincing. From the German sniper's position in the hedgerows, the silhouette would appear to be a British soldier attempting to cross exposed ground. Nothing happened for 17 seconds. Then a rifle cracked from the northeast, and the plank jerked as a bullet struck its upper section, penetrating the weathered oak, but not shattering it. The impact was precisely where a soldier's upper chest would be, a killing shot if the target had been human. "There!" Hartley shouted, his eyes fixed on a section of hedgerow 215 meters distant, where he had seen the muzzle flash, a brief orange bloom in the green vegetation. "Northeast, second hedgerow, 3 meters left of that dead tree." Davies was already moving, shouting coordinates to a Bren gun team that had been positioned for exactly this purpose. The light machine gun opened fire, raking the hedgerow with sustained bursts. For 5 seconds, nothing changed. Then a figure tumbled from concealment, a German soldier in camouflaged uniform, his carabiner rifle falling from dead hands. The silence that followed was profound. Soldiers who had been watching from cover emerged cautiously, staring at the collapsed enemy sniper, then at the weathered plank with its fresh bullet hole. Then, at Hartley, as if the Yorkshire corporal had just performed magic, Captain Whitmore arrived 7 minutes later, his expression unreadable as he examined the dead German, then the plank, then Hartley. The captain's jaw worked as if he were chewing words too bitter to speak. "Corporal Hartley," Whitmore said finally, his tone carefully neutral, "it appears your unorthodox method has merit." "Sir, how quickly can you construct additional units?" Hartley felt vindication surge through him, sweet as victory. "With proper materials and help, sir? 4 more by noon." "See to it." "And Corporal," Whitmore's expression softened fractionally. "Well done." The words spread through the battalion like electricity. By 0900 hours, Hartley had been assigned a team of 6 men, carpenters, engineers, soldiers with practical skills, and given access to every scrap of salvageable wood in the operational area. They worked with the focused intensity of men who understood that what they built would save lives, transforming weathered planks into instruments of counter-sniper warfare. The engineering was refined with each iteration. They added hinges that allowed the planks to collapse flat for transport, painted some surfaces to enhance the human silhouette, attached harnesses that let 2 soldiers operate each device with coordinated rope movements. By 14:30 hours, 5 complete units had been deployed across the battalion's defensive perimeter, each one positioned to probe different sections of the hedgerow where German snipers were suspected to hide. The results were immediate and devastating to enemy morale. At 15:12 hours, a plank device crossing an exposed road drew fire from 2 snipers simultaneously, a tactical error born of target opportunity. Both positions were immediately bracketed by artillery fire, called in with precise coordinates. At 16:47 hours, another device revealed a sniper position that had killed 3 British soldiers over 2 days. Concentrated machine gun fire eliminated the threat permanently. By nightfall on June 19th, 6 German snipers had been located and neutralized, none of them having killed a single additional British soldier. But the true test came on June 20th, when Hartley deployed all 5 devices in a coordinated operation designed to flush out every remaining sniper in the operational area. The plan was audacious: simultaneously move all wooden decoys across multiple exposed positions, forcing the German marksmen to either reveal themselves by firing or abandon their carefully prepared positions. At 06:15 hours, the operation commenced. 5 teams of 2 soldiers each worked their ropes with practiced coordination, making the weathered planks dance across courtyards, roads, and field margins in movements that mimicked human caution. The German snipers, who had operated with impunity for days, suddenly faced an impossible tactical dilemma: fire and reveal their positions, or hold fire and watch apparent British soldiers cross ground they were supposed to defend. The response was chaotic. 8 German snipers fired within 90 seconds, their muzzle flashes blooming across the hedgerows like deadly flowers. British machine gun teams and sharpshooters, pre-positioned and ready, responded with overwhelming firepower. Within 4 minutes, 8 enemy positions had been neutralized. 2 more German snipers were spotted attempting to retreat from their hides, abandoning positions that had become death traps. Both were killed by alert British riflemen. By 0700 hours on June 20th, the sniper threat that had paralyzed the 50th Division's advance had been effectively eliminated. 14 German marksmen, the exact number of British soldiers they had killed, were dead or captured. Not a single British casualty had occurred during the entire operation. The weathered planks, dismissed as field madness 36 hours earlier, had proven themselves more effective than conventional counter-sniper doctrine. Hartley stood in the farmhouse courtyard, watching soldiers move freely across ground that had been a killing zone 2 days prior. Sergeant Davies approached, carrying 2 tin mugs of tea, the British Army's universal remedy for every situation from boredom to battle. "You've made military history with a shed plank," Davies said, handing Hartley a mug. "That's got to be a first." Hartley sipped the weak tea, feeling exhaustion finally settle over him. "Just did what needed doing, Sergeant. Same as everyone else." Not the same, lad. Most men follow orders. You followed logic. There's a difference. Around them, the battalion was already preparing to resume its advance inland, freed from the invisible threat that had pinned them down. The cost of British ingenuity, some weathered wood, rope, and a willingness to ignore doctrine when doctrine was killing men. The cost of German inflexibility, 14 trained snipers eliminated because their tactical doctrine couldn't adapt to an enemy who refused to fight by established rules. Word of Hartley's success spread through the British Second Army with the speed of rumour in wartime, transforming from operational report to legend in the space of 48 hours. By June 22nd, battalion commanders across the Normandy front were requesting details of the shed plank method, and staff officers who had spent careers mastering conventional doctrine were confronting the uncomfortable reality that battlefield innovation could emerge from a gamekeeper corporal with no formal military education. But while British units rushed to replicate Hartley's technique, the German army was conducting its own analysis of the tactical disaster that had eliminated 14 snipers in 2 days. In a command post 8 kilometers south of the British positions, Oberleutnant Klaus Weber reviewed after-action reports with growing unease. Weber commanded a sniper detachment that had been devastatingly effective against Allied advances until June 19th, when his carefully positioned marksmen had begun dying with alarming regularity. The intelligence reports confused him. British soldiers had apparently crossed multiple exposed positions without suffering casualties. Yet when his snipers fired at these targets, they had been immediately located and killed. The logical explanation that the British possessed some new detection equipment didn't match field observations. His men reported firing at what appeared to be enemy soldiers, only to discover they had shot wooden planks. "They're using decoys, Herr Oberleutnant," said Feldwebel Ernst Kaufmann, Weber's senior NCO, a veteran who had served in Poland and France before Normandy. Wooden silhouettes operated from concealment. They move them across exposed ground, and when our men fire, the British pinpoint the muzzle flash. Weber stared at the map on his field desk, marked with red crosses indicating where his snipers had died. 14 positions compromised, 14 trained marksmen lost, all because they had fired at pieces of wood animated by British ingenuity. "It's absurd," Weber said, his educated German accent reflecting the disbelief of a man trained in military science. "Sniper doctrine emphasizes target identification. How could trained marksmen mistake wood for soldiers? The decoys are convincing from distance, sir. Weathered planks with knot holes that resemble human features. They move like men advancing cautiously. In combat conditions, with split-second decisions required, the deception is effective." Weber felt frustration surge through him, the bitter realization that his enemy had outmaneuvered him, not through superior equipment or overwhelming force, but through creative desperation. The British had faced a problem that conventional tactics couldn't solve, so they had abandoned convention entirely. The Wehrmacht, with its emphasis on doctrinal purity and established procedures, had no response prepared for an enemy who refused to behave according to military theory. "Issue orders," Weber commanded, his voice tight. "All sniper teams are to confirm targets before firing. No shots at unclear silhouettes, no matter how tempting. We cannot afford further losses." But the order came too late and proved too restrictive. By mandating positive target identification, Weber had surrendered the initiative that made snipers effective. His marksmen, now hesitant to fire at anything that might be a decoy, missed opportunities to engage actual British soldiers. The psychological advantage shifted entirely. German snipers, who had operated with confidence for weeks, now questioned every target, their effectiveness reduced by doubt. Meanwhile, Hartley had become something he never desired, a tactical consultant. On June 23rd, He was summoned to Second Army headquarters, a requisitioned chateau 10 kilometers behind the front lines, where staff officers planned operations in rooms that still smelled of French aristocracy beneath the overlay of British cigarette smoke and wet wool. Major General Graham Hughes, commanding the 50th Division, received Hartley in a study lined with leather-bound books that the chateau's former owners would never read again. Hughes was a professional soldier who had fought in the previous war, a man whose face carried the exhaustion of command in an attritional campaign. "Corporal Hartley," Hughes said, gesturing to a chair that Hartley was too conscious of rank to sit in without explicit permission. "Your shed plank method has eliminated the sniper threat across your battalion's sector and is being adopted throughout the division. I'm told you developed this technique independently after your superiors dismissed the idea as impractical." "Sir, Captain Whitmore was following established procedure. I just saw the problem differently." "Indeed. And therein lies a lesson the British Army must relearn in every war, that innovation often comes from unexpected sources, and that rigid adherence to doctrine can be as dangerous as the enemy." Hughes paused, studying Hartley with the assessment of a commander evaluating potential. "I'm promoting you to sergeant and assigning you to divisional headquarters as a tactical advisor. Your task will be to train counter-sniper teams across the division in your methodology and to continue developing field expedients that conventional planning overlooks." The promotion was honor and burden simultaneously. Hartley had never desired authority, preferring the familiar scope of a corporal's responsibilities, but the battlefield had decided otherwise. Men lived because of his innovation, and that success created obligation. The training program began on June 25th. Hartley found himself standing before 40 soldiers, selected from various battalions, men whose expressions ranged from curiosity to skepticism. He recognized that look, the same doubt Captain Whitmore had shown when a corporal suggested defeating snipers with wood. "Gentlemen," Hartley began, his Yorkshire accent unchanged by promotion, "what I'm about to teach you isn't in any manual, won't be found in any tactical doctrine, and probably violates several regulations. But it works, and that's all that matters." He demonstrated the construction technique, showing how weathered wood could be selected for grain pattern and knothole placement that suggested human features. He explained the rope harness system that allowed operators to animate the decoys from safety. He walked them through the coordination required between decoy teams and fire support elements, emphasizing that the method's effectiveness depended on immediate response to revealed sniper positions. But the most important lesson was philosophical rather than technical. The Germans have better optics, better training, and doctrine perfected over years of warfare, Hartley said, holding up one of the weathered planks. "We can't match them in those areas, but we can refuse to fight the battle they expect. We can improvise, adapt, and employ solutions they can't counter because their doctrine doesn't acknowledge such solutions as valid. That's our advantage. We're willing to look ridiculous if it keeps our mates alive." The impact was measurable within days. By July 1st, Hartley boards, as the devices were now called, had been deployed across the entire British Second Army front. German sniper effectiveness dropped by 70% as their marksmen, uncertain whether targets were human or wood, hesitated before firing or abandoned positions that had become compromised. British casualties from sniper fire declined from an average of 12 per day across the division to fewer than 3. The German response, when it came, revealed the limitations of doctrinal rigidity. Rather than developing their own deception methods or adapting to the new tactical reality, Wehrmacht commanders issued increasingly restrictive rules of engagement for their sniper teams. Marksmen were ordered to fire only at confirmed military targets verified through extended observation to avoid obvious decoy characteristics, to withdraw from positions after single shots rather than maintaining them for extended periods. Each restriction reduced the effectiveness of what had been the German army's most potent weapon in hedgerow warfare. British soldiers, who had spent weeks moving with constant fear of invisible death, began advancing with confidence restored. The psychological transformation was as significant as the tactical one. Men who had felt helpless against an unseen enemy now believed they could counter any threat through ingenuity and determination. On July 4th, Hartley returned to his original battalion to observe operations. He found Captain Whitmore directing troops across ground that had been impassable 2 weeks earlier, the captain's movements confident and unconcerned with sniper threat. "Corporal, my apologies, Sergeant Hartley," Whitmore said, approaching with hand extended. "I owe you an apology. When you proposed your method, I dismissed it as desperate improvisation, unworthy of serious consideration. I was wrong. You saw what professional military training had blinded me to, that sometimes the best solutions are the simplest and that unconventional problems require unconventional responses." Hartley shook the offered hand, feeling the weight of vindication mixed with recognition that victory carried its own complications. "You were following proper procedure, sir. Can't fault a man for that. Perhaps not. But I can fault myself for valuing procedure over insight. The army rewards conformity, Sergeant, but wars are won by men who recognize when conformity has become liability. That evening, Hartley sat with Sergeant Davies, now his peer in rank, and watched the sun set over Normandy countryside that had finally become peaceful. The hedgerows still stood, ancient and imposing, but they no longer harbored invisible death. The weathered planks that had accomplished this transformation leaned against the farmhouse wall, bullet-scarred testaments to the power of simple ingenuity applied with determination. "We're advancing tomorrow," Davies said, sipping the eternal weak tea. "Clear to the next river line, they say. First time in weeks we're moving forward instead of dying in place." "About bloody time," Hartley replied, feeling exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical labor. "Though I'll wager we'll face different problems further inland." "No doubt. But now everyone knows, when conventional methods fail, find a Yorkshire gamekeeper with mad ideas about wood." They laughed, the sound carrying across a battlefield that had finally fallen silent, a testament to the simple truth that sometimes the best weapons were the ones no military academy would ever teach. The Normandy campaign ground forward through July with the relentless inevitability of industrial warfare, transforming French countryside into shattered moonscape through the application of artillery, armor, and infantry in proportions that would have seemed impossible to previous generations. The 50th Northumbrian Division, freed from the paralysis of sniper threat, participated in Operation Goodwood, the breakout from Caen, and the eventual closure of the Falaise pocket that destroyed the German 7th Army. Through all of this, the Hartley boards remained standard equipment, their effectiveness undiminished even as the tactical situation evolved. When British units encountered German defensive positions in urban terrain, the weathered planks revealed machine gun nests concealed in buildings. When fighting moved to open countryside beyond the hedgerows, the decoys identified anti-tank positions that conventional reconnaissance missed. The principle remained constant. Give the enemy a target they couldn't resist, then punish them for taking the bait. By August 1944, the method had spread beyond British forces. American units adopting the technique reported similar success against German positions. Canadian battalions constructed their own versions, adding innovations that Hartley incorporated into his ongoing training program. The simple expedient that Captain Whitmore had dismissed as absurd had become doctrine, taught in tactical schools and refined through combat experience. But the true measure of the Hartley Board's impact became apparent only through statistical analysis compiled by Army intelligence in September 1944. A confidential report circulated to senior commanders quantified what frontline soldiers already knew. British casualties from German sniper fire had decreased by 83% in sectors where the decoy method was employed. German sniper effectiveness, measured by kills per marksman per week, had dropped from an average of 4.2 to 0.7. The psychological impact was equally significant. Soldier morale improved measurably when troops believed they possessed effective countermeasures to threats that had seemed unstoppable. The German response to these statistics revealed the institutional rigidity that characterized Wehrmacht operations in Normandy's final months. Rather than developing their own deception methods or radically adapting their sniper doctrine, German commanders issued increasingly detailed regulations defining proper target identification procedures. These regulations, born from fear of decoy tactics, had the unintended consequence of reducing their marksmen's effectiveness to near irrelevance. A weapon system that had terrorized Allied soldiers for weeks was neutralized, not through superior firepower, but through creative manipulation of enemy doctrine. Sergeant Thomas Hartley, meanwhile, found himself transformed from gamekeeper corporal to reluctant tactical innovator. His promotion to sergeant had been followed by assignment to the newly created Field Expedient Warfare Section, a small unit tasked with identifying unconventional solutions to tactical problems that conventional planning couldn't solve. It was, in essence, institutionalized improvisation, the Army's acknowledgement that innovation couldn't be confined to staff colleges and that battlefield necessity generated solutions no peacetime training could anticipate. On September 12, 1944, Hartley received orders reassigning him to Britain to train instructors who would disseminate his methods throughout the Army. The war in Northwest Europe would continue without him, but his contribution would persist through every soldier who learned that sometimes the best weapons were the simplest, and that questioning doctrine wasn't insubordination, but tactical necessity. Before departing, Hartley returned one final time to the farmhouse where he had first tested his mad idea. The building remained shattered, but the surrounding area showed signs of recovery. French civilians returning to rebuild homes, fields being cleared of rubble, the slow healing that followed liberation. The shed, where he had found the weathered planks, no longer existed, its remains having been scavenged entirely for counter-sniper equipment that was now deployed across the entire Western Front. Captain Whitmore found him there, the officer having been promoted to major and given command of a battalion that would soon participate in the assault on Germany itself. The two men stood in silence for a moment, contemplating the ground where 14 British soldiers had died before innovation changed the tactical equation. "They're calling it the Hartley method in tactical journals," Whitmore said, his tone carrying something that might have been amusement or regret. "Your name will be in military history as the man who defeated German snipers with shed planks. How does that feel?" "Uncomfortable, sir," Hartley replied honestly. "I just wanted to stop watching mates die, never intended to revolutionize anything. That's how most revolutions begin, someone refusing to accept that nothing can be done. You saw men dying from a threat we couldn't counter, and rather than accepting that as inevitable, you developed a solution that conventional training would never have produced. That's the essence of military innovation." Whitmore paused, choosing his next words carefully. "When I dismissed your idea, I wasn't being obstinate. I was being professionally educated. Sandhurst taught me that warfare is a science with established principles, that solutions come from applying doctrine correctly. You taught me that warfare is also art, and that sometimes the best practitioners are those who never learned the rules that limit imagination. Not sure I'd call it art, sir. More like desperate improvisation, perhaps. But consider what you accomplished. 14 enemy snipers eliminated without a single British casualty. An entire division freed from tactical paralysis, a method adopted across multiple armies. And all of it achieved with materials that cost nothing, required no advanced technology, and could be constructed by any soldier with basic tools. That's not just innovation. That's revolution in military thought." Hartley absorbed this assessment, uncomfortable with praise that seemed disproportionate to what he considered simple common sense applied under pressure. "Just did what needed doing, sir, same as everyone else." "No, Sergeant, not the same. Most soldiers do what they're ordered. You did what was necessary, even when it meant defying orders. There's a critical difference." The conversation was interrupted by a young lieutenant arriving with dispatches, and Whitmore departed with a final handshake that carried the weight of respect between men who had learned hard lessons together. Hartley remained alone in the farmhouse ruins, contemplating the strange trajectory that had brought a Yorkshire gamekeeper to military prominence through the application of weathered wood to modern warfare. The statistical legacy of the Hartley boards would be analyzed for years by military theorists trying to understand how such a simple expedient produced disproportionate results. The answer, though complex in its implications, was simple in its essence. The method worked because it exploited German doctrinal inflexibility while leveraging British willingness to improvise. The Wehrmacht had spent years perfecting sniper tactics built on concealment and patience, creating an institutional investment that made adaptation psychologically difficult. The British Army, lacking the same doctrinal rigidity, could more easily adopt unconventional solutions when conventional methods failed, but the deeper lesson transcended specific tactics. The Hartley boards demonstrated that military effectiveness wasn't solely determined by equipment quality, training standards, or numerical superiority. Innovation, improvisation, and the willingness to question established doctrine could compensate for material disadvantages. A corporal with a mad idea could accomplish what professional military planners couldn't, provided that idea emerged from genuine understanding of the problem rather than theoretical knowledge of proper procedure. By December 1944, Thomas Hartley was instructing classes at the British Army Tactical School in Hampshire, teaching officers and NCOs that the most dangerous phrase in military thought was, "We've always done it this way." His students included men who would lead battalions across the Rhine, fight through Germany's final defensive positions, and eventually occupy the shattered remains of Hitler's Reich. Each of them carried forward the fundamental lesson that a Yorkshire gamekeeper had demonstrated with weathered planks in a Norman farmhouse, that warfare's greatest weapon was adaptability, and that victory often belonged to those willing to look ridiculous in pursuit of solutions that worked. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. By that time, the Hartley method had become so thoroughly integrated into British tactical doctrine that few soldiers remembered it had once been considered absurd improvisation. The weathered planks that had started everything had long since been destroyed or discarded, replaced by standardized equipment manufactured specifically for counter-sniper operations. The innovation had been institutionalized, the revolutionary made routine. Thomas Hartley was demobilized in August 1945, returning to Yorkshire and his pre-war occupation of gamekeeper with relief that combat was finished and satisfaction that his contribution had mattered. He received a military medal for actions in Normandy, a decoration that cited his exceptional tactical innovation and disregard for personal safety in developing methods that saved numerous lives. The medal joined other wartime memorabilia in a drawer, rarely examined but always remembered. In subsequent decades, military historians would analyze the Normandy campaign's tactical evolution, noting how British forces overcame initial disadvantages through adaptation and ingenuity. The Hartley method featured prominently in these analyses, cited as exemplary instance of battlefield innovation, emerging from practical necessity rather than theoretical planning. Staff colleges incorporated it into curricula as case study, demonstrating that military effectiveness required both doctrinal knowledge and willingness to abandon doctrine when circumstances demanded. But for the soldiers who had served in Normandy during those desperate weeks when German snipers seemed unstoppable, the legacy was simpler and more profound. They had watched a gamekeeper corporal refuse to accept that nothing could be done, had seen him construct a solution from literal scraps, and had witnessed that solution transform tactical reality. They learned that innovation didn't require advanced education or technical expertise, only the courage to question assumptions and the determination to implement ideas that others dismissed as impossible. The weathered planks were gone, consumed by war's voracious appetite for materials. But their impact endured in the soldiers who survived because someone had been willing to look at a shed's collapsed timbers and see not rubbish, but opportunity. That was Thomas Hartley's true legacy, the demonstration that in warfare, as in life, the most powerful solutions often emerged not from complexity, but from simplicity applied with intelligence and courage. 14 enemy snipers eliminated in 2 days with shed planks and rope. A victory that proved ingenuity could triumph over doctrine, and that sometimes the best weapon was the one that made everyone laugh until it started saving lives. If this story of British ingenuity and resilience resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel for more untold histories from the Second World War. We explore the remarkable contributions of ordinary people who achieved extraordinary things when their nation needed them most. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Did you know about the Hartley method before today? What other overlooked innovations from the war should we cover next? Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into history's most compelling human stories. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the simplest solutions change everything.